Today is, of course, Easter, the day we commemorate the resurrection of Jesus. And Jesus was crucified on Friday. His body was placed in a tomb. And on Sunday morning, some women went to the tomb and found it empty. Jesus had risen from the dead. Of all the things that Christians say about Jesus, the resurrection is the most important thing. If you read the Gospels, you will see how the narrative moves through Jesus' betrayal, through his arrest, through his crucifixion and burial, and it moves to the resurrection. The resurrection is what all that happened before led up to. Jesus' betrayal, arrest, and crucifixion move toward the resurrection. I want you to imagine for a minute you go to a movie and you see the movie and you see all these situations and this plot is playing out in the movie. This happens, that happens, a whole big plot happens in this movie. And then there's the ending. The ending is what it all led up to. And the ending is what you take from it. The ending is the high point of the movie. And you know, if the movie ends well, it doesn't really matter what happened during the middle of it. You'll leave happy and satisfied that the movie ended well. And that's the way it is with the gospel. What we take away and the way it all ends is with Jesus resurrected from the dead. That's what you take with you when you read the gospel. And I think it's a good thing sometimes. I know people, they might read a chapter or a verse or something, but I think it's a good thing to sit down and read a gospel all the way through. Just sit down and do that. And then that will give you a sense of this is where this is leading to, is the resurrection. Now, after the Gospels in the New Testament book of Acts, it tells us that Jesus stayed on earth 40 days after his resurrection before he ascended into heaven. Now, what did he do during those 40 days? A lot of it we have no idea. The Apostle Paul tells us that he appeared to 500 people during that time. A couple of the Gospels, though, do give us some interesting things about what Jesus did. And in Luke, we find the account of two of Jesus' followers. They are going down the road to the town of Emmaus, and they encounter a man along the way, and they travel along with this man, and they talk with him. Now, this is Jesus, but they don't recognize that it is. And when they get near the town of Emmaus, this man with them says, well, he's going on because he's going on farther down the road. But they encourage him to stay because it's getting late and getting dark. And he goes into the house with them, and they all sit down and they have something to eat. And while they're eating, these two men recognize that this indeed is Jesus. And then after Jesus leaves, they get up and they rush to Jerusalem to tell the disciples that they have seen Jesus. And then Jesus appears with them. And they're afraid. They think it's a ghost. But Jesus tells them to look at his hands and his feet and his side and see the wounds from the crucifixion. And they do that. And then Jesus tells them to touch him. And they do that. And then Jesus sits down and eats with them again. The Gospel of John tells us that on the same day Jesus arose from the dead, 10 of the disciples were hiding in a room behind locked doors. And they were hiding because they were afraid of the Jews. Remember, the Jews had just killed Jesus, and the disciples were afraid of him, and they were hiding. He said that all of a sudden Jesus appears in the room, and he shows them the wounds on his body from the crucifixion. It was really him, and it was really him in a body. There was one of the disciples, though, that was not there. That was one named Thomas. And later on, when the other disciples tell Thomas about this, Thomas said, I don't believe you, and I will not believe you unless I see it and unless I touch him and touch those wounds myself. A week later, all the disciples are again gathered together, and Thomas is with them this time, and here is Jesus appearing behind the locked doors. He tells Thomas to touch his wounds, and Thomas does so. John reports another scene, this one sometime after that. Several of the disciples, including Peter, have gone fishing, and they've fished all night long. They haven't caught a thing. And early the next morning, they notice a man standing there on the shore. They don't know who it is. And the man calls out and asks them if they have caught anything. They say, "No, we fished all night, not caught a thing." And this guy said, "Well, let your net out on the right side of the boat." And they do, and they catch so many fish that they have trouble hauling it in. Then Peter recognizes that that man is Jesus. They go ashore. When they get ashore, they see that Jesus has built a fire, and he's baking bread and fish there, and they sit down and eat with him. You see, all these things are interesting because they tell us that Jesus really did rise from the grave in his own body. The Gospels go to great lengths to be sure we know that. It was not that Jesus' spirit rose from the grave. The women went to the tomb and found it empty. All four Gospels report that the tomb was empty. And then we see those episodes where Jesus appears in a real body. People touch him. He eats. He cooks. And all of these things are to emphasize it was not a ghost. It was not a spirit. It was not some kind of story the disciples came up with. But Jesus rose from the grave in his real body. The real resurrection of Jesus in his own body from his grave is the very foundation upon which Christianity has put it. As the Apostle Paul said, if Christ is not raised, genuinely raised, then our faith is in vain and we are to be pitied. The resurrection is the point around which all of Christianity turns. It is the key component of the Christian faith. And here's how important it is. Many times in the Gospels and in the New Testament, it is stated that in order to be saved, we must believe in Jesus. There's nowhere, though, that indicates exactly what we must believe except one place. That's Romans 10:9. It says, believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. The only place in the entire Bible that it specifies what you have to believe about Jesus says, believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. That's how important it is. And that's sometimes puzzling to people why the resurrection is the key. Why is it not the crucifixion? Why is it not the teachings of Jesus? It is because in the final analysis, Christianity is not really about getting your sins forgiven. Christianity is not really about living your life according to certain teachings. What Christianity is about is life. We'll one day die. Our life will come to an end. When you're 20 or 30 years old, we don't think about it. Oh, you know you'll die one day, but it's so far off that you don't think about it. Oh, my life will go on forever. Seems like an eternity until your life will end. None of us are 20 or 30 years old. We're way past that. And frankly, most of us are nearing the end of our lives. You know, we don't have 40 or 50 more years left to live. We might not even have 5 years left to live. Just look at the obituary in the paper every day. It's all going to come crashing down in the middle. And then what's going to happen? People will forget us. It'll eventually be like we never were. And you know, what was it all for? I know all of you in here, a little bit about all of you. I know a lot about some of you because some of you I've known for 40, 50 years or more. And I know there's not a single person sitting in this room right here whose life has been easy. Not a single one of us had an easy life. We've all had troubles and problems and heartaches. And sometimes it's been a downright struggle. It really has. And then it just ends, and you're forgotten. If that's the case, Why bother? What was it all for? Why did we go through all this? All the troubles and heartaches and struggles. Just to die and be forgotten. You see, that's exactly what Christianity addresses. And Christianity tells us that all this is not for nothing. Christianity tells us that this is a journey to our true home, which is in heaven, and to true life, which we will have in heaven. As the Apostle Paul said, heaven is where our true citizenship is. That's where our true home is. We are sojourners here. That means we're traveling through here on our way to somewhere else. We hear Jesus say, in my Father's house are many dwelling places. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. The author of 1 Peter says that because of the resurrection of Jesus, we have what he calls a living expectation of an inheritance in heaven that will never fade away. God is keeping it from us. God is keeping it for us, according to 1 Peter, keeping it safe. And it will always be there. The book of Titus says that God has promised us eternal life, and it promises us that God does not lie. See, this is what Christianity is all about. Death is not the end. Death is not the end of me. It's not the end of you. It's not the end of who we are. Our lives on earth will not have been pointless. Now, sometimes when we think of the resurrection, we may think of the resurrection as like we survive death. Like there's something about us that's going to survive. Like our body might die, but something else is going to survive. But the Christian idea of resurrection is not about death survival. The Christian idea of resurrection is death reversal. That's the Christian idea. Death reversal. And this idea of death reversal carries with it the idea that God will reverse the conditions that lead to death. Today we live in mortal bodies that decay and get old and eventually die. But God will reverse that. We will have immortal bodies that will never decay, that will never age, and will never die. Today we live in a world in which everything eventually dies. A world which hinges on death. God will reverse that. We will live in a world where death will have no part. You see, the Christian idea of resurrection is a reversal and a transformation. We are transformed into immortal, and the world is transformed into something where death has no part. But even in the midst of that, Christianity says, you will still be who you are. I will still be who I am. We will still be us. We will still be the unique person that we are right now. It's just that we will be released from bodies that decay and die. We will be released from a world in which death reigns. Remember, the resurrection of Jesus was not just that his body came back to life. It was that he came back to life in a transformed body. It was his body, though. We see in the accounts of the resurrection that Jesus still had the wounds from his crucifixion on his body. We also see that Jesus ate after he rose from the dead. But we also saw how Jesus could appear in locked rooms behind closed doors. You see, it wasn't just that Jesus somehow came back to life on Easter Sunday morning and then lived another 20 or 30 years and died of natural causes. That's not what happened. Jesus came back to life in a transformed body, and that transformed body ascended into heaven. It was a transformed body because previously Jesus had an earthly body, but it was transformed into a heavenly body. And that's what we are promised to. God will take this body that gets old. I've got arthritis in my thumb, and sometimes it bothers me. I've got arthritis and other things too occasionally. Our bodies don't work the way they used to. Our minds don't work the way they used to. I was leaving yesterday and one said, don't forget that red bag laying beside the door. You think I remembered that red bag that was laying beside the door? No, I don't. And so nothing works as well as it used to. That's because we live in these bodies that decay and age. But God is going to transform that into a heavenly body that's not subject to all of that. But it'll still be us. You see, we'll be released from this body that decays, and we will be released from this world that depends on death. It is a transformation from an earthly body to a heavenly body. I know all this stuff seems fantastic and like a bunch of myths from an age that's long past. We live in an age today where science is the God, where science has truth, where science is what people worship, and where science is what is leading people away from Christianity. And sadly today there are psychologists who tell us that people who believe Jesus' body actually rose from the grave and believe that Christians will rise from the grave and have eternal life are suffering from mental disorders. And sadly, some of these people are even Christian psychologists. There are even so-called Christians today who believe that Jesus' body didn't rise from the grave, that it was just stories that were made up as Jesus became Christ after he was killed. You know, we can go along with him if we want to. Or we can depart from the crowd and continue to believe that Jesus really did rise from the grave. It's up to us. I want you to imagine a married couple that worked really hard for many years during their lives, and they accumulated some wealth. They were able to buy a lot of things, had a really nice house, grounds around the house really nice, had a house at the beach. They liked to travel, and they were able to go all over the United States. Then when the man was only about 70 years old, he got sick with an incurable disease. And it wasn't long before his wife's health also began to fail. The good times were over. None of the stuff and none of the money really made that much difference anymore. It may have been a good life for a while, but it did not last. Back a few years ago, this company called Raymond James Financial Services had a commercial on TV that absolutely burned me up. Now, like many commercials on TV from places like that, it talks about retirement like the ultimate goal of human existence is to have a retirement. That's what you live for, your retirement. And that particular commercial showed a man making all right decisions during his working years and investing his money, of course, with Raymond James. And later, when he's older, this old man is dressed very nicely, obviously expensive clothes, sitting out on the beach, obviously in an expensive area, maybe Hilton Head or somewhere like that. And a voice says, "Life well planned." Like that man is going to sit there forever. You can be sure that he won't. That well-planned life won't last very long. That man ain't going to sit on that beach forever. One day his well-planned life will come crashing down. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your treasure is in this life, you don't have to be reminded this life will end. You already know it. You know your life will end. If you have any doubts, just look at the obituaries in the paper and see how old they are. So if your treasure is here on earth, you know what the end of that's going to be already. But if your treasure is in heaven, then the end of this life is not as big of a deal. The end of this life is that which will take you home to your true destination, to where you really belong, to an inheritance that never fades away, to a retirement, so to speak, that will never come crashing down. The Apostle Paul says, "Eye has not seen, and ear has not heard, nor has entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him." We do live in a world ruled by science today, and we live in this world now ruled by science is a world that rejects anything religious and anything spiritual. It is a world that tells us there is nothing more than this life, and we will never have anything beyond this life because there is nothing beyond this life. And we live in a world where, sadly, more and more of organized Christianity is going along with that and making Christianity all about here and now. But we have a Bible, and that Bible contains the witness to something that some people saw happen 2,000 years ago. They didn't understand it. They didn't know how it happened. They just know that they saw this stuff happen. They witnessed it. And when they witnessed it, they could never be the same again. It changed everything. It changed the way they looked at everything. It changed the way they thought about everything. It changed their whole lives from then on. After they witnessed it, they could never be the same. And they could never look at things the same. We can call those people liars if we want to and say they were lying to us. Or we can choose to believe what they witnessed and pass down to us. The Apostle Paul wrote, "We know that if this earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." He goes on to say, "For we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, so that mortality may be swallowed up by life." Think about that, so that mortality may be swallowed up by life. And you know, that's what the resurrection of Jesus really means. That mortality is swallowed up by life. Just as light chases away darkness, so does life chase away death. And that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ.